So we don't talk about money. Why is that? Why don't we talk about money? What are the implications of a lack of financial conversation? That and more on today's episode of Money Talk with Skyler Fleming. You know, we don't talk about money enough. It's a topic that gets ignored for some reason, even though it plays a role in everyone's day-to-day life. Well, this issue is what brought Money Talk with Skyler Fleming to reality. I know you're probably busy and don't have the time to research and learn about all things that go into personal finance, but that's where this podcast, Money Talk with Skyler Fleming, comes into play. I'm your host, Skyler Fleming, and I'm here to do the research and learn all the extra stuff about personal finance for you. The goal is to simply get us talking about money, so let's get talking. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I wanted to change it up slightly with a different introduction. I hope you enjoyed that. But like I said, we're going to be talking about how we don't talk about money. What are the issues that arise from that? What are the benefits if there are any? What if we want to talk about money more? What if we were to talk about money more? Let's talk about that. The money talking points from today's episode are, why don't you like talking about money? And 2, how can I talk about money more? Let's dive right into today's episode. So let's dive into it here. Talking about money, just to define it right out the gate, is a great thing. It's something we all need to do. Prohibiting conversation about money is a gigantic red flag. Imagine the largest flag in your mind, those Macy's US flags that you see on the side of the freeway and those big old flags that fill up the whole sky. Color it red and picture that in your mind when you think about someone or a company prohibiting conversation about money. Think of the biggest red flag. It's that big. Financial literacy and wage transparency are huge deals. And they're what gets restricted the most when you start prohibiting conversations about money, especially around salaries. And we need to talk about money more so that we all do better with money, so that we have more fair salary negotiations, more fair pay, and that we're all more financially literate and can squash out the bad actors in the financial industry that are just trying to make money off of us. But how does this impact us? So now I'm saying, imagine this giant red flag. So now that you have this in your mind about how talking about money is good, how does it impact us? Or how does not talking about money impact us as well? So how does not talking about money hurt us? Why is it such a bad thing? Well, it increases pay gaps. It increases financial struggles. It disadvantages people in poverty severely. It gives corporations a large amount of unnecessary control over wages and pay. It leads to unfair treatment because, well, simply if you don't talk about money, you don't know what's unfair. How are you going to know you're being paid unfairly if you're not talking to your coworkers about pay? How are you going to know you're being treated poorly by your bank if you're not talking to others about your bank and about your interest rates or about your credit card interest or about how this loan situation really screwed you over? How are you going to know it's unfair if you're not talking to other people? So that's just some ways it can hurt us, especially, I hope you caught the one in the beginning, any sort of pay gap that might exist in your workplace or in society as a whole gets increased or kind of forgotten about when we don't talk about money, just because it's one of those things you don't know if you don't know. So how does not talking about money help us? Well, I guess it helps us avoid hard conversations, but that's not a good thing because the easier and easier these conversations become, the better. And that's going to happen just by having these conversations. It gets easier and easier to talk about money as you talk about money. So it might be really hard in the beginning, but it's going to become a whole lot easier once you see the gain that comes from your coworker getting a raise that they deserve because you started to talk about money with them, or you getting the raise you deserve because you started talking about money with your coworkers. And it's just going to become easier and easier. It's going to be better and better for everybody once you start seeing the benefits, once you start seeing others see the benefits, because you're going to be sharing your wins, you're going to be sharing success stories, and everyone's going to start doing a whole lot better. And it's going to really, realistically, if we're all talking about money more, it changes the economy because banks and credit unions and like bad actors in the financial space aren't able to take advantage of people. Like payday loans are gone if we talk about money more, because then we start teaching each other ways to handle our money, ways to avoid those terrible situations that payday loans leave people in, those kind of things are gone. And companies really have to, especially financial companies that are making money off of interest or bad loans that aren't good for the consumer, those things can begin to go away because we start to learn what unfair treatment is, because we're talking about what's unfair. So now that we kind of have a definition and an impact of how not talking about money plays a role in our lives, how do we implement talking about money more? Let's talk about that next. So how do you start talking about money more? We'll start with something simple. If you're afraid to or don't want to talk about your financial situation, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. If you want me to be a third party who won't judge you for your financial situation, who doesn't really know you, so I can't push too much unnecessary advice down. I can't overwhelm you with unnecessary advice because I don't know your whole situation, but I can start to give you specific advice and tips towards the financial situation that you might be struggling with, because I know sometimes it can be really intimidating. If you have that one coworker or colleague or friend or family member who's killing it with their money, they're rich, look rich. I mean, maybe they're not killing it with their money, and that's where the conversation can help. Maybe they just look rich, but really they're struggling, and your conversation might help them get through that. So I hope you see how this can impact everybody. But you have that one friend or family member that's just rocking it with their money. You know they're doing well, and you don't want to talk to them. I'd be happy to chat with you about my ideas and maybe share some opinions or advice if you want that. I'd be happy to give it. If you want to just have a third party that's not going to judge you for your financial situation, please email me. My email's in the show notes. But let's go back to starting something simple. So if you want to start talking about money, talk with a friend and say, hey, what do you think about interest rates that are going up right now? How is that impacting your savings account? Or you could just say, hey, I got an ad for this online bank that savings rate's going up, like Ally Bank. I got an ad for them. Have you ever heard of them? They might say, oh yeah, I've heard of them. I actually have all my money there. It's super safe. I like it. And then you then say, well, I'm concerned about having all my money at an online bank. How does that work? Well, it's really easy. You never really touch the money that's in your savings account. Plus, now that you don't have access to a physical branch to go get the money out, and guess what? You can even still use ATMs with them. So then right there, you've met someone who is also using a bank that you're questioning. You've began to ask questions about your concerns, and now you're having a conversation about increasing your interest rate on your savings account, which may not lead to a whole bunch more money, but it's better than the 0.00% that you're earning at your normal big bank. And I would say that's a very helpful conversation that gets people in the right direction of learning how to allocate their money, which can become more helpful when they're becoming savvier investors and things like that. So another thing that's simple is talk about how much money you spent on gas or in a certain category. Ask them how you can decrease that. I think the situation, I can play a little bit with my opinion on this one. So if someone were to come to me and say, hey, how much money did you spend on gas? It's well, me and my wife both drive to work and school every day, but we only spent about $150 last month on gas. People will be like, wow, you must live really close to where you go. And no, it's because we're using public transit and resources outside of our gas guzzling vehicles. And we have pretty gas efficient vehicles, but we're still spending very little on gas each month because of these alternatives. And that may not be a specific conversation about money, but it can lead to a conversation that's helpful in the rest of your life. You can also say, well, how are you spending so little on gas? What do you usually get it for? Well, we get it for this amount. Well, that's cheaper than I get it at this gas station. Well, we actually have a Sam's Club membership, which we found really helps all of our families. We share it with each other to decrease our gas costs. So maybe you want to look into that. Just those little things. I think simple conversations like that can help people either figure out new ways to do things like public transit, or new ways to share money, like a membership that might pay off just with the savings in gas. But also you could talk about something that you hate about money just to get other people's opinion. So ask your friends or a family member for their input on this situation. If you don't want them to cram advice down your throat, just don't take it personally. We all tend to do it, family and friends. If you try to get their input on a financial question, will probably try to overwhelm you maybe a little bit with advice. But look at it as a chance to build your knowledge base and use it as a way to give yourself more things to research. All the advice may not be helpful in the moment, but talking about money can lead to better conversations over time as we learn what is good to talk about and what is not. Another one to start simple is to talk about pay with your coworkers. This impacts all of us. Be honest and open when talking about your salary and pay rate. Don't withhold information because you think your company will be mad. If they will be mad and fight you about it, that's that big red flag I was talking about in the beginning, and start looking for a new job that pays you fairly, because it's likely that they're not. Odds are pretty high, if they want to squash pay conversations, that they don't pay you fairly. So a previous employer of mine is where I'll leave that at. We had our manager one time email us and say, reminder of the policy to not talk about pay, but if you do talk about pay, don't be upset by what others say. Whoa, what does that mean? Because it was recently coming about that the new employees were starting at a rate that's the same, like they're now getting paid the same as people who have been there for quite a while, because this pay structure was set up that you'd automatically get raises if you were hitting metrics every 2 months. But now the new employers are making what the people who have been there and hit these metrics are making, but they didn't get a raise. So that talk was creating a little bit of uncomfortableness among employees. They were like, what the heck? That's kind of lame. But then the managers come out and say, don't talk about pay, but don't be upset and complain to us. Like, that's a huge red flag. They obviously don't care to pay their employees fairly, because they want to squash conversations about pay, because they know when you talk about pay, you're going to realize you're not being paid fairly. I have a couple questions around this topic that I want to discuss. Let's get into that next. So what if you start talking about money with somebody and they say something rude? So the question is, what if someone says something rude about my financial situation? Well, this one can be really hard. It can be really upsetting, because so much of our lives and everyone's life revolve around finances. Like, finances are a big part of everyone's life. So if someone says someone rude, or someone says you suck with finances, or says something rude about your situation, that can be really difficult. I would say in this situation, you have to make sure to not take things personally and understand that the person, if they are coming from a rude place, then that relationship might be something to consider. But if they're trying to come from a helpful place, and maybe they say something along the lines of, people who do this are dumb, or people, like, they may not know. I wouldn't judge the person trying to give you advice entirely based on if their advice may be slightly rude to your financial situation, but that could be a really hard one to consider. Next question is, what if someone gives me too much advice that I don't want and I feel overwhelmed? Well, take a step back from the conversation and don't apply your feelings about that conversation to talking about money as a whole. Take it as a chance to break down what they said. Maybe go and write down what they said so that you can take that burden off of your mind of feeling overwhelmed, and you can begin to digest what they said and understand what they said a little bit better. So I would say go write down all the advice they give, or ask them to write it down for you and say, hey, that's a lot. You just shared a lot of information with me. Can you send me an email? Can you send me a text? Can you send me a Marco Polo that I can watch over and over again to kind of get a grip on your advice? Because I think that's a lot for me to implement in one go. So I'd say write it down. Next question is, how do I talk about money with someone who I know needs my help? Change your mindset about this, or you're going to end up being the person in the last question who I was talking about. If the person needs your help but isn't asking for it, don't offer them all the advice you can give them. It's just going to make them feel uneasy, uncertain, overwhelmed, judged. They're going to be the person asking, what do I do if someone says something rude about my financial situation? So I'd say if you know someone needs your help, I would honestly wait till they ask for the help. Let them know that, if they express frustration about a financial situation, be ready to provide your helpful feedback and to provide your insight and some of the things you've experienced around that situation. But don't just go and give them all the advice you immediately know they need right in this moment, because you're going to help change their life, because it's going to make them feel overwhelmed and not that helpful. So the next question is, how can I start talking about money with someone? Like I said, start simple. Email me, comment on social media. If there's a topic about money on a social media post, comment about it and add your helpful information. Be positive and nice about your conversation. That goes back to the couple questions ago. Be nice, be helpful, don't judge people, because money is a very intimidating topic for a lot of people. And sometimes it might be people's first time talking about some sort of a financial subject. So be nice, be simple, keep it simple and easy, because honestly, there's a lot of simple and easy things that we can all do around our money that are going to help everybody. But let's wrap up today's episode next. So in conclusion, don't be afraid to talk about money. We all do better when we talk about money. It helps everyone, and those who it doesn't help want to squash the financial conversations of financial literacy. Example, bad employers and big banks, they don't want us to talk about money, because if we start doing better with money, they start doing worse because we realize how much money they're taking from us and interest and all those sort of things. But thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Guess what? We're pushing towards 1,000 listens. We're getting really close. How cool is that? Thank you all for listening. If you want access to my money talking points to get started talking about money, it's a resource that you can find in the show notes. If you want any extra help or have a conversation about your finances, feel free to email me. Of course, my email is also in the show notes. But thank you for listening to Money Talk with Skyler Fleming. I'm your host, Skyler Fleming. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to Money Talk. The Money Talk show is provided for informational and entertainment purposes and should not be used for personal or specific financial advice. Every situation is unique and different. Please make sure to do your own research for your personal financial situation.